Well, Alex, thank you for joining us. This is an absolute moment for us. I don't think you guys realise at Tifo how much the rest of the world loves you.
No, I guess. I mean, I read the comments under the videos sometimes, and that's a mix. You know, there's some love there. There's definitely some hate as well. But yeah, no, it's lovely. It's lovely to be with you this evening for you guys, this morning for me, obviously, because of time zones and whatnot. But thank you for asking.
As I'm not sure, you would probably not realise, because Nathan and I, it's the only way that we can really connect and speak about football is through Tifo, and that's probably the most special part about speaking with you today. And you know, Nathan and we've always had this insatiable appetite to learn more about football, especially because in Australia there's just such limited coverage in our national media, and Tifo's absolutely filled that void. What do you make of Tifo's impact across the globe, apart from the little comments that you see?
I mean, I guess it's always been like a really pleasant surprise for me. I mean, Tifo, you know, when Joe started making the videos, and it was very much a way of looking at the content that we were already doing and trying to package it up in a different way. Obviously, you know, YouTube straight away opens you up to an audience that can find your content more easily than just having a website and social media. But looking through, you know, when we do the audience demographic breakdown and we can see where in the world people are watching our stuff, you know, it's pretty cool to realize that you're reaching people in, you know, Ghana and Nigeria and Nicaragua as much as you are in the US or Australia. Obviously, you know, the UK and Ireland is our main demographic, but sometimes we'll put out a video that's specific to a country that we don't normally talk about. So the NSARS video, for example, that we did recently on the civil unrest that there's been in Nigeria. And straight away you can see you're reaching an audience there of people who are from that country or from the diaspora, and they're saying, thank you so much for doing this and for talking about it. And I think one of the things that Joe's always been really, really keen on with Tifo is that we don't shy away from dealing with these difficult topics. And I think that's one of the ways that we've been able to reach out to a wider global audience, is by talking about things that matter to people outside a very kind of Western, you know, Anglo-ethnic, you know, this is football, that, you know, it's England's game, blah, blah, blah. We talk about it everywhere. And I think that really helps us.
I think the game it seems like the coverage of the football is very Eurocentric, as you just mentioned, and as you see when you look at the YouTube analytics of where some of your viewers might be, and that is in itself, you know, can be surprising in a way. What has been the biggest surprise so far in your journey with Tifo Football?
I think surprise would probably be the affection that people have for Tifo. I mean, it's you know, content. There's a lot of football content out there, and some of it's really, really good. But there's something about Tifo, and I can't explain it. I don't understand why it happens, but there seems to be a genuine sense of a community of Tifo fans, and you know, these are the sorts of things that people, when they're talking in a kind of marketing sense about you know, content or social media, or they'll try and chuck these buzzwords in and talk about a sense of community and everything. But I think with Tifo we genuinely have it, and I don't know whether that's because there's quite an authentic feel to the way we talk about stuff. It may be the breadth, you know, we'll look at tactics, but we'll look at politics and sociology and the rest of it. It's probably Joe's voice quite a lot. Because,
I think that's it.
Because Joe's voice does just seem to draw people in and sort of then lull them into this lovely relaxed sense of, you know, they're learning stuff, but they feel like they're being gently cuddled at the same time.
Is that where the warm embrace comes in?
I guess it is. I mean, Joe will he'll say things on podcasts, and Seb and I, who are perhaps a little more dry and a little more, I don't know what's the word, sort of, I don't want to say rehearse, but like Seb and I are kind of, we're there to talk about a thing, you know, and then Joe will just, he'll just go somewhere else. He'll just take it on a tangent, and that might be cool hands and warm embrace. It might be something completely different. You never entirely know what he's going to say.
I think Nathan has a theory about this because your voices just sound so articulate. I don't know if it's the South Englishman in you here, but everything just sounds like you're an academic professor.
Must be the British accent that carries it forward.
Well, possibly. I mean, I was an academic researcher. I was doing a PhD in medieval English literature and teaching undergraduates. And I think I'm not saying that being clever helps you speak about stuff, but I do think if you're used to presenting information to other people orally, then that's a skill that you can practice and learn over time. I used to hate doing it as well. I used to hate giving like conference papers at, sort of little conclaves of medievalists and standing up and talking about Chaucer or what have you. I was very nervous. I would sort of scratch the back of my head like this and try and avoid eye contact with people. But it's definitely, it's something that you can grow into. And Joe's very good at it naturally. And I have learned how to be better at it as time has gone on. And I think there's still room for improvement. Definitely. I have a tendency to waffle slightly. And I can get into these little nerdy cul-de-sacs and have to be rescued sometimes. But, it seems to work quite well. So, yeah, people enjoy it.
We love your tangents here. It's absolutely phenomenal, I think.
I feel like almost a little bit like a mind reader, considering I pinned you down as an academic, and you absolutely lived up to expectation here. And I'm trying to work out, how does someone go from a medieval academic to working in football full time? How does that happen?
By way of 6 years in the police for a start, which doesn't really answer your question or make it any easier to understand. I mean, one of the things I found about being an academic was it was difficult to feel like I was part of a wider community or to connect with anything. I loved my research and there were some really interesting people there, but I was looking at a topic that was incredibly niche, and I knew that if I was going to teach other people, particularly at the university that I was at, then a lot of them would be doing it so they could go and get a job as a lawyer or a banker or what have you. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, but it became increasingly difficult for me to kind of justify doing that to myself. And then I ended up having to drop out of the PhD because somebody published a load of stuff in the US, which rendered quite a lot of my work unoriginal, which was just bad luck. I mean, it happens all of the time. There's no kind of cheating or plagiarism or anything involved.
That's a late minute heartbreaker there, sucker punch.
It was a little bit an extra time, winning or golden goal or whatever. So I decided to try and find something that was as opposite to academia as possible. And by that, I don't mean not intellectually challenging or rigorous. I mean working with other people, having some sort of wider purpose and all the rest of it. So I spent almost 6 years in the police as a direct result of that, wanting to kind of do something for the benefit of others. And then when I left the police, because it's a terribly run organisation in the UK, the Metropolitan Police, or was at the time, probably still is. And I just got fed up with not being able to do my job properly. I had been starting to read more good football stuff. So I think the 2010 World Cup saw, I don't know, there was a lot of good tactical writing. Michael Cox was kind of bubbling up. Inverting the Pyramids had been published 2 years before. The Blizzard started about a year or so afterwards. And I started to get back into that sort of thing. I'd played football at university. I played football at school. But it was just the right time for me to find a way into writing about football that was more kind of culturally focused, and I'd look at football and art or football and literature, and started blogging about it. A few people noticed that on Twitter, and so when I left the police, I thought, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try freelance football writing. And I have to say, it was a very, very silly thing to do. I mean, retrospectively, it all worked out fine, but I was so ill prepared. You know, I didn't have the contacts. I didn't have the experience. I just kind of blindly went for it and thought, yes, I will be able to make this work. And it took a good couple of years and some lucky breaks. And in fact, my first proper kind of sports gig was actually in rugby union rather than in football. So I worked with a guy called Simon Gleave, who's what was called Infostrada, is now called Gracenote, and we did the Rugby World Cup stuff, doing data and analytics for their website. And that was the first time I'd been part of like a grown-up, team of content producers working on a sports event, and it was really exciting. It was great until Australia beat Scotland in the dying moments of a game, and I was very upset. But that kind of, at that point in time, I think blogging, the first wave of good bloggers had kind of passed through. People like Michael Cox had started to get actual jobs. But Twitter felt like it was still a much friendlier and more collaborative place than it is now. And so you could, get messages from people that were looking to hire somebody, and you could have conversations with people that were helpful and instructive, rather than this kind of cavalcade of bitterness that sometimes now seems to populate it. So yeah, I got very lucky in terms of timing. I got very lucky in terms of a few individual instances of being hired to do stuff. And then I linked in with Tifo. And I'd known Joe already from a podcast that he used to do called The Illustrated Game. And Tifo, which was called UMax at that time, was looking for writers. I was starting to get more interested in tactics and data largely from the rugby stuff, actually. And it just kind of worked out from there.
You must laugh, though. I don't know if you've been invited to go back to universities and speak to sports media kids, and then they ask you, how'd you end up in sports media? And you just go, well, it just happened. Yes. I mean, the good thing is that there's definitely a sensible answer to the question of how you should end up in it. That there are still, there are some excellent sports journalism courses here in the UK. There are some really great courses. In fact, Winchester University, my local one, has a very, very good course in the history of sport, which can then lead you off into kind of fertile areas to look at. There is still, although increasingly less, the role of local newspapers. And it's really encouraging to see people like Reach PLC, where Greg Johnson is the head of football, putting out adverts for some of the sites that they have. They are still hiring, even in a really tough economic climate. Because I think sport is one of the things that people, not everybody obviously, but a lot of people looked forward to during the lockdown period, the resumption of sport. It's one of the things that gives people something to concentrate on, something to get excited about, and obviously surrounding that with good and interesting writing about it is part of making it accessible and interesting. So you can, there are avenues into writing about sport that are a lot more sensible and intelligent and well-informed than the one I took, which was basically, I'm going to just see how this goes and fingers crossed. Did you always think, though, that the people that you spoke to, they had an understanding of football, but nothing like the way that you saw the game, the way that you viewed it, and the understandings and takeouts that people wouldn't realise about the game? You were already seeing them.
So I guess I guess that's something that's developed over time, actually. So my one of the things from my academic research and also from stuff that I've done otherwise is I'm obsessed with patterns and particularly visual patterns. So I mean, with the academic research I used to do, it was about intertextuality, spotting when sentences, phrases, ideas have been used in one text and then borrowed and put into another. So I've always had this thing where I can recognize those things, I can keep them on my mind, and when I see them again, it's like, oh, that's that again. Applying that to football was something that happened, or initially, like I say, in part because I applied it to rugby, and rugby was a game I was better at as a player of. And so I guess it came more naturally to me to see what was happening on a rugby pitch, and then I figured, well, you can do this for any sport, and it's interesting to do it for football. I also was very lucky in that Inverting the Pyramid, Jonathan Wilson's book, was exactly the kind of book I enjoy reading, even if the topic wasn't tactics, because it's very well researched. It's quite dry, but there's enough anecdotally in it to make it more interesting. But it goes really deep into a topic and provides this kind of through line of development that you look at and go, oh, okay, that this makes sense. There's something to really get to grips with here. So I think, I don't believe that without Inverting the Pyramid I would have got to this stuff as quickly as I did. I think that was really instructive. And also I guess I don't get caught up in the emotion of stuff quite so much.
You're heartless. You're cold-blooded.
It's not. I'm not cold and heartless.
It's got a big heart, Dave.
If you show me an advert for a dog charity, I will be, I'll be very sad. There's something about the way that I get into sport, which doesn't require so much that stuff. If I watch Southampton and they do well and then they lose, like they did against United recently, obviously I feel something there, but I don't, I'm not like, it's that, I don't know why. So there's a kind of, I guess what I'm saying is that there's a skill set, there was a cultural context almost, and then there's something that just dovetails with what I'm kind of generally like as a person. And I got very lucky.
So the Aguero moment, you were like, oh, he should have just tackled him first time instead of everyone absolutely losing it.
You're kind of looking at these things and thinking, well, if he'd stepped over there, or it's I suppose, don't get me wrong, there are always moments in sport where, I mean, I can still remember, for example, where I was sitting for the first game of the 2002 World Cup when Senegal beat France 1-0. And I remember watching that game because at university where I was at the time, we'd had a sweepstake for the football team for the nations that we would support during the World Cup. And obviously, there was like a prize. And I drew Senegal and sat down to watch the opening game of that tournament, with everybody expecting France to win as defending champions and everything, and then Senegal go and beat them. And I was like the only person that was happy.
And wasn't Papa Baba Diop the first goal scorer as well?
Yeah, who very sadly died. So it's not like I'm entirely divorced from getting enjoyment from stuff, but I suppose part of it is that I find a lot of that stuff really inflated, but by which I mean the media drives these kind of narratives, and I'm not talking about the individual depth of feeling that a fan has when they're watching their team. What I'm saying is that if I have no interest in a team, then there's a likelihood that if I respond emotionally to stuff, it's because the narrative that frames that particular game is kind of geeing me up to see it as Pep versus Mourinho, light versus dark, blah, 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 and then when it happens, it's like, oh, this, Pep's got, and I don't care about that stuff. I don't, if you're a Manchester City fan in the stadium watching that game, have at it, go as wild as you like. But if you're like me and you're sitting back, then it's, there's no, it feels almost artificial to get kind of drawn into the So I'll watch it with the sound off. And
I hope there's no Sky Sports recruiters listening to this.
The thing is, like, I mean, I'll be entirely honest. I would have no interest in working in this space for anyone other than Tifo. If Sky Sports or the BBC or whatever wanted me to, I just wouldn't. Part of what makes Tifo what it is, I think, is that, Joe and I knew each other from before. Seb and Joe knew each other from before. Our studio manager is Alice, who is Joe's sister. Some of the illustrators I've met previously because they're old friends of Joe's. The company, obviously now we're at the Athletic, we're working with this whole other group of people, which is fantastic. But the core group of Tifo people, we're sort of friends and we know each other and we know what we're good at and bad at. And Joe can be critical of my stuff without me thinking, oh, this is terrible. What does it mean for my job security? Or like, it's just Joe saying that was not very good. Do it again. And it's fine because it's him. So there's something about what we do and how we do it that I think makes it something I really enjoy, as opposed to the idea of talking about football general. Like, don't get me wrong, I like talking about football, I like watching football, but it's in the context of Tifo that makes it rewarding and engaging in a way that has kept me interested, and I don't think I'd necessarily have that doing it for somebody else.
I suppose it also feels like a big family and this kind of journey that you've come together across from, UMax to football to Tifo.
Yeah, totally.
With the Athletic as well. Where also on Sky Sports, you're kind of not even like, I think, on the same level as the other ex-players that they have on as pundits. You would be kind of just that football nerd on Sky Sports to tell you about the expected goals.
And there are, there are some people who have made the jump from. So I'm thinking particularly of Ali Maxwell and George Ellick, who have a brilliant podcast called Not the Top 20, which is about the Football League, so everything under the Premier League. And they will now go on Sky occasionally as, Championship particularly experts, and that's brilliant. I love seeing people who really know their stuff and have researched it and live and breathe it and are articulate and smart getting those opportunities. And I think there should be more of that. I think we should, there's absolutely scope to open mainstream punditry up and take it out of the hands of a small coterie of ex-professionals. Don't get me wrong, some of them are really good, but a lot of them, in my opinion, aren't. That's, again, reflective of the way I like to hear about football, and that's not necessarily what everybody wants. But you're right, there is definitely something about the fact that, Joe and I started off, what would it have been, maybe 2014, maybe slightly later, doing social media for what was UMax. And then a couple of years later, we're having meetings about how we can expand it. Then a year later, we're in an office working together most days and talking about ideas and throwing things back and forth. And then a few months after that, we're invited to San Francisco. And like there's a journey of how UMax became Tifo, became what it is now. And having been a bigger and smaller, increasingly, I suppose, bigger part of that makes it more special. Because it's we've achieved something with it, I guess.
So what happens?
I'd like to
in San
think so.
Francisco stays in San Francisco.
Well, what happened in San Francisco was, so we'd already met the Athletic in, I think it was maybe, I want to say June or July. So they were over in the UK, doing their big hiring drive. ahead of the launch of the what is called the Athletic UK, but is basically the football side of things, excluding MLS and Liga MX stuff, which incidentally is really, really good as well. There's some fantastic writing about North American sports on the other bit of the site. So yeah, we went and chatted to them, and initially they wanted to sponsor the podcast, as kind of, surfacing the brand in the UK a little bit. I was already a subscriber. I had been a subscriber for probably about 8 or 9 months because I can't remember how I came across it, but I just really liked some of the longer stuff, the way they talked about some of the nerdier aspects. So I was already sold. I was like, these guys are good. We should definitely listen to what they have to say. And then as that relationship kind of matured a bit over the course of a couple of months, we were then, so me, Joe, and Neil Clerk, who was, the sort of the original founder of UMax as it was, we were invited to San Francisco, and it was very much a sort of, if we were to combine, i.e. them by us, what would it look like? What ideas do you guys have for where that could go? And it was genuinely exciting. It was only 36 hours, which the time differences from here to San Francisco it basically killed me. And I'm somebody who used to do night shifts. So, but it was, I guess if you start a small company like Tifo, then the dream is to be able to continue that with some sort of financial backing or security that allows you to keep doing what you're doing and enjoying, but with this sense that it's kind of going somewhere, that it's not just a daily grind to, make enough advertising revenue on a monthly basis to keep your head above water. And The Athletic had, like I say, I was already sold on the basis that I'd been reading their stuff for months, well ahead of them talking to us. But it just felt like these were people that wanted to talk about sport the way that we wanted to talk about sport, and that they were already doing that. And then you look at the list of the people that they'd hired in the UK to talk about, James Horncastle for a Serie A, Rafa Honigstein for the Bundesliga. You're like, obviously you want to be part of that. I can now WhatsApp James Horncastle and say, just tell me something about Sassuolo I can put at the beginning of a video. And he's like, yeah, of course. He's such an expert, and he's so nice as well that,
and it's
having
the long hair
that
does it for me as well. Apart from the knowledge,
he's just got that thing, hasn't he? But underneath that debonair, charming exterior is somebody who really knows what they're talking about, and there's a generosity of spirit among the journalists where, when we were working on the Sensible Transfers series over the summer, for example, and teaming up with editorial to do that, or yesterday, for example, I rang up Chris Woff, who's Newcastle United, and we just chatted for 15 minutes about issues with Newcastle United. And there's the kind of, we have access now to this range of people who are really good, but also really nice and happy to talk about stuff and want to talk about stuff. And it just makes what we do better and kind of easier as well, which is no bad thing.
Every day it sounds like you've made the right choice not moving to a Sky Sports. Otherwise, you might be standing outside Dortmund's training ground fighting with other journalists for the latest scoop on Jadon Sancho or someone like that, where there's not such a communal spirit.
And there's, I think one thing that I'd be keen to emphasize is there is, in my opinion, there is absolutely a place for that kind of stuff. And I would never, ever want to give the impression that I personally, certainly not Tifo, kind of looks down on other forms of football content. That's completely not what we do. And I make use of that stuff, but it's not what I would want to be doing. It's not what Joe would want to be doing. And I also think crucially, if we were working somewhere else, we wouldn't be able to put out a video on is your football club going to be underwater by 2050? We wouldn't be able to put out a video on SARS. We wouldn't be able to talk about, you know, the issues with Mohammed bin Salman acquiring Newcastle United. Like being with Tifo gives us a license to be able to do that stuff, because we've built up a reputation for being fair and honest and impartial. And that's, I'm not saying again that Sky Sports News isn't fair and honest and impartial, but they're not going to let us do that stuff, you know. Whereas The Athletic were like, yeah, brilliant, keep doing that stuff. That's, you know, we like that.
I think it was really impressive that because as a politics major, political science major myself, that I quite enjoy, especially those videos where you have all the political news about, especially in the Premier League now with the kind of sports washing with Newcastle and Man City, or even the Nigeria SARS thing. And you know, you talk about how Joe wasn't afraid of shying away from these topics. How did you feel about taking, you know, a bit more of this political route? Because I think in football or sports in general, you have people saying, you know, oh, we shouldn't mix politics and sports, but in reality, they're kind of all interconnected in a way.
In reality, everything is political.
That's what I believe.
Nothing is not political.
That's what I believe. You know, very much so.
There's no interaction that I can have as a human being that does not have some political valency. It might be the choices that I make as a consumer. It might be the choices, I mean, by purchasing things, it might be which media I choose. It might be, you know, accepting something about my football club or challenging something about my football club. But if we are rooted in society, which we are, you know, everything has a political ramification or import, and so the idea that, you know, take for example the Black Lives Matter protests, and the action taken by Premier League footballers and footballers in lots of other places. For example, my dad is a huge Formula One fan. And loves Lewis Hamilton, and obviously Lewis Hamilton has been at the forefront of that collective action among F1 drivers. The idea that people outside of that sport or even just outside of that individual can say to no, you really don't kneel before a Formula One race because you're a racing driver. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to try and lecture a footballer on whether they should or should not be allowed to express a preference in these things. And it's not like Marcus Rashford is, you know, lopping up a t-shirt that says vote Labour on it. It's like, I can understand how overt political messages in some senses might be difficult. You know, if those footballers want to do that in their own time, crack on. Like Brian Clough was a huge Labour supporter. But protesting against, you know, racial inequality, how can you say that's a bad thing? I don't understand it. And then, yeah, like Tifo has always, you know, the balance that we've always tried to strike is, obviously when we handle these topics, we have to be sensitive to them. We have to get expert opinion to make sure that we are being fair and impartial and open. And we lean on certain freelance journalists that we know will supply us with that stuff. And that sits alongside climate change and sports washing and all the rest of it. And we have got some very cool things in this space next year, by the way. I will say no more than that. But that's, again, you know, part of what we like to do is, you know, we want people to be exposed to this stuff. If you're a football fan, you should know if your club is taking dirty money, or if there is an issue around governance, or if there is corruption, or whatever it is. We're not going to tell you necessarily, therefore, like, we'd never say boycott this team, but what we would say is you should be aware that this is a thing that you should consider, and you may not have heard about it, and you may not have had it explained this clearly and cogently before. But in order to get some of those people, it's also really good that we do Why David Silva is Missed by Manchester City, because we've got this breadth of stuff that means we can we can appeal to people whose interest might be because they're Manchester City fans, or they're David Silva fans, or they love football tactics, or, you know, if we talk across the range of topics, we're more likely to get people engaging with the stuff that then makes them think, oh, actually, I should take this more seriously. I should be an advocate for labour rights in Qatar, or I should support a petition to ban violence in Nigeria, or whatever it is, you know.
I think you guys do a really good job of kind of bake it into the content. Like you said, you talk about, you know, why Manchester City missed David Silva, but at the same time you talk about things like SARS, and I think you do a really good job of the video kind of thumbnail and the titles as well, because I remember especially with the Nigeria one where you talked about, you know, these footballers are standing up against SARS and all of this. I remember thinking, oh, so it's going to be like more about the footballers talking about it, but when you go into the video, it's kind of majority of it is actually you guys delving into the issues and actually explaining it, and then you kind of sprinkle in a bit of the football links and connections to keep it tied to football.
Well, I think that's crucial, because also, you know, the way of thinking about that video, for example, is that if I'm a Manchester United fan, which I'm not, although I see you are, you know, Odion Igalo makes an impassioned statement via an Instagram video about this topic. And if I'm a Man U fan, I'm thinking, what is that? Why is one of my footballers talking about this thing? So for us, the idea, yes, football is kind of a hook for that, and it's the reason that it's relevant. But if we're talking about the fact that footballers are talking about it, and we're only talking about that, well, that's something that you can learn anywhere else. You know, the media was full of, this footballer is saying that SARS is bad. So we're just duplicating things there. What we want to do is go, why are they saying it's bad? What is it? Is it bad? You know, and interrogate those things so that we're providing a level of information that goes beyond what everybody else is talking about, and doing it in a way that is globally accessible, where people have English as a second language. The fact that it's illustrated and the fact that we use text on the screen does make it slightly more accessible. Also, YouTube has a subtitling function, so people can do that. And, you know, there's, in some instances, I don't want to be too crusady about it, but it may be that people are able to access stuff in our content that they can't access through the domestic media service in their own country because it's banned, or because there's corruption, or because the interests of that individual outrank the tenacity of that particular news organization, and they think, oh, we're not gonna talk about that, you know. So I think Tifo provides a really useful service in that way. And yeah, it is more important than being able to make better Football Manager tactics from the videos that I do. It is more important. At the same time, I think if we didn't have the balance, we wouldn't have the breadth of audience, and we wouldn't have people who came for one thing sticking around for something else, which I think is really important.
Yeah, especially when the biggest example I can think of that's something maybe that's really controversial, you know, that has some precedence is Muhammad Ali and his kind of advocacy of not being enlisted to go and fight in the Vietnam War. I think back then he lost his basically his career. He couldn't fight, and there were, you know, two fervently opposing sides. But then now, when you look back after all these years, and history has kind of rewritten and smoothed over the edges, and now he's kind of revered by everyone.
Yeah. Well, he was right, wasn't he? So, I mean, war is not good. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think people will look back at these interventions, not necessarily in a different light, because I think there are plenty of people who can see what Colin Kaepernick did for what it is, which is a hugely powerful and important transitional moment in, you know, certain areas of US culture talking about racism. That's obvious to a lot of people, but I think when this is looked at retrospectively, I think it'll be seen in that sort of wider context as being that important by history, whatever that means, as opposed to just people saying it now.
Have you always been very interested in the political side of things? Because right now you seem to be very well read and you understand these issues quite a fair bit.
I mean, I try. I listen to the BBC a lot, the World Service particularly. My dad's a journalist, so I grew up in a house where this stuff was talked about. But also because he was a journalist, it wasn't slanted massively one way or the other. It was like, here are a series of facts or arguments. So I grew up, I guess, in a situation where it was encouraged for me to be aware of the different facets of stuff without necessarily plonking myself down on one side or the other, or hearing those arguments framed as, this is what these people are saying, but they are wrong. You know, it was much more discursive and open than that, because as a political journalist, he wasn't allowed to take sides. So, you know, he was thinking about it in that way. I think also as well, having done a period of time working in the public sector here, that has, I guess, opened my eyes to a lot of things that people coming from my background. So, you know, I have a privileged background. I attended a very good school. I then went to a very good university. That, you know, that if I hadn't had that experience, I think I would not be as aware of certain of these issues as I am. And nothing will radicalize somebody. I don't mean radicalize in a bad way, but nothing will increase a person's political engagement more than working for a government, because you can see how badly a lot of things are done, and it's very, very frustrating.
Speaking about raising awareness of issues in our current climate, our mission here at DT38 is to change the stigma associated with men's health issues and the focus on testicular cancer. And as such, what has been the ballsiest moment in Alex Stewart's career?
I mean, I've there are various ways of answering this, and I'm not sure I'm going to answer.
You have the creative freedom here. You have the freedom of the.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm also sensible.
Sensible
I mean,
transfers here. Give it a plug.
Yeah, definitely leaving the security of a job, even if it was a job that was driving me a little bit mad, and going, I'm gonna be a freelance football writer. You know, there was something quite ballsy about that. It wasn't very sensible. Like I said, there are a lot of things I should have done that I hadn't done in terms of preparation and so on, but I wanted to do it and I wanted to make it work. So yeah, and I would encourage people. I would encourage people to check their balls, obviously. But I know that's not what we're talking about here. But I like, if you are passionate about doing something, or if you really want to try and do something, then do go for it. Go for it in a sensible, planned manner. Obviously, I'm not that spontaneous. But there is evidence all around of this stuff working out. If you want to do something and you're prepared to put the time and the effort into it, there is a good chance it will work out well. So yeah, do that, but also check your balls.
Of course, absolutely here. And did you ever feel the pressure succumbed with doing and going to such elite schools during your university and earlier life? Was there pressure to always be that someone that it's achieved the success that you have now?
It's hard to answer that. I guess there's an internal pressure. There's a sense that I want to be good at whatever I do. I can't say. I mean, my parents have always been really, really understanding of stuff. The rest of my family also. I mean, my brothers run a business buying and selling horses. My sister is a head teacher. So my sister's really the only one who's kind of, picked a career and stuck with it. But that was after a couple of years of not really being sure what she wanted to do and so on. So I guess we're as a family, we're very encouraging of trying different things, and you know, as long as you put the effort in and try and do it well, it doesn't really matter what it is. I found the expectations from the school that I was at to be a bit odd, I suppose, in the sense that it, you know, it was an elitist institution, and there was an expectation not of individual achievement, but of how we would view having been at that school and the relationship, not even the relationships that we would carry on, but almost this kind of sense of what it meant to have gone to that school. And I found that very strange. I mean, it's a school, it's not, you know, but there's something slightly cultish about it in terms of how some people saw that. So that was something I very much took against and thought, I don't really want any part of that, and I don't have anything to do with it now. But no, I guess, you know, I've done jobs that were pressured. You know, the police is a stressful job. It had an impact on a lot of things. When I left, I think I was not in a good state. And so, you know, being able to talk about those things and be open about them is hugely important. But you know, I think actually I've been very lucky in terms of how the sorts of people that would ordinarily be there going, are you sure about this? You know, friends, family, and so on, have always been supportive and encouraging of the various random things that I've ended up doing.
Well, thank you for filling Nathan and I's hearts up so much. I know you're not one for emotion here, but we're so glad that you are the Francesco Totti here, the Tifo stable, and you are a one club man.
This is very true. Yes, I pledge myself to, and I have also some really nice Roma shirts, so I appreciate the analogy.
Oh, beautiful. No, thanks so much for coming on the DT38 podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been good fun.
We hope we can see you in your castle in Winchester one day.
Yes, well, you're always welcome to come to the UK. Please come.
Thanks, Alex.